You're listening to the Born to Kick Arse podcast with Matt Tomasi and can be found at borntokickarse.com/episode 47.
Welcome to the Born to Kick Arse podcast, where you're introduced to the most fascinating people on the planet. Learn the ingredients of greatness that you can apply to your life. And now your host, Matthew Tomasi.
Karl Speedgoat Meltzer is an elite ultramarathon runner who has won more 100-mile races than any other human on Earth, currently at 38. Karl recently ran the fastest known time along the 3,500-kilometre Appalachian Trail in 45 days, 22 hours and 38 minutes. Some of Karl's incredible achievements include 2006 Ultrarunner of the Year. Karl's the all-time winner at the Hardrock 100 with 5 wins. All-time winner, the Wasatch 100 with 6 wins. All-time winner at the Massanutten 100 with 4 wins. All-time winner at the San Diego 100 with 3 wins. All-time winner, the Squaw Peak 50 with 5 wins. Karl is also the race director of the Speedgoat 50K and has his own line of shoes, the Hoka One One Speedgoat. In this episode, Karl drops some knowledge on what it takes to become one of the greatest ultra-trail runners of all time. Enjoy the interview. Karl Meltzer, welcome to the Born to Kick Arse podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. It's great to be on Born to Kick Arse. It's my first time on this podcast. I look forward to it.
Congratulations with the Appalachian Trail record. How's the legs? Are they recovered yet?
So since the Appalachian Trail finished on September 18th, my legs I'm about 3.5 months after now. So yeah, I'm right about at the recovery phase of, I like to say I'm up to speed at this point. So yeah, I'm about recovered. I'm just starting to get into my training a little bit more intense now. Yep. And, my head's recovered too, because after you do something like that, you really don't feel like doing anything except eating. Yep. So, but yeah, and I'm feeling good. I'm ready to race next year and ready to have a good season.
Yep. Yeah, cool. So when you say next year, do you mean 2018 or 2017?
No, I mean 2017 for sure. My first race will be sometime in April. I'm not exactly positive on what race that will be, but that's probably the first one I'll go back to.
Now, you've won more 100-mile races than any other human on Earth. How many have you won?
I've won 38 times at 100 miles. And, it's kind of mind-boggling to think that how many times I've actually run that many. But came in second a lot of times too, there are a lot of times when I could have won more. But that being, put that aside, it's an honor to be able to still run, to be able to still run and do what I love to do after being in the sport 20 years. Yeah. So yeah, 38 wins. I don't think anyone's chasing it anytime too soon, but at the same time, competition has got so stiff these days that it's going to be hard to catch that 38 wins unless someone really focuses on that distance like I did back in, say, 2001 is when I really started thinking about just running hundreds and really focusing on how many wins. I mean, we don't really see that much these days right now in ultra running. People are focusing on sort of main events, there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's just a little bit different focus than what I had back in my earlier days.
In terms of your longevity, continually winning all these 100-milers over the years, is there something that you can really point your finger at? Is it your diet or your genetics, or is there anything sort of in particular that you do?
Diet, but I'm not Mr. Perfect. I mean, I'll eat a cheeseburger and fries once in a while and a pizza as well, I mean, I think really a lot of it has to do with genetics, and a lot of it has to do with just really listening to your body and not knowing when to overdo things. I think, I also started running ultramarathons when I was 30 years old, and that was seeing a lot of younger guys, they start doing really well and running long distances when they're in their early 20s. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's pretty cool because they're actually going to be ultimately faster. That's why records are getting better and better. But I started it when I was 30. And so my miles that I ran from, say, age 20 to 30, they weren't really extreme miles. I wasn't throwing down 120-mile weeks. I was running like 40 miles a week, if that sometimes. So I think over time, looking at the big picture, and I think that, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm just thinking like if you look at my total mileage per year, it goes up about 5% every year up till probably about now. Yeah. So the bottom line is that I did slowly increase my mileage over my career instead of jumping up so fast. It's like the same scenario as saying going out too fast in a marathon and bonking at mile 20, right? It's sort of the same kind of concept where I never really went overboard, I don't think. And I realize I've run a lot of hundreds. I run 75 times in 100 miles, so that's kind of a little mind-boggling. But at the same time, I don't overtrain in between those races where I kind of put my body at jeopardy of becoming injured. Yeah. I mean, I've been injured plenty of times, don't get me wrong, but none of them have really been, career-threatening injuries or something that really put me out for more than 4 or 5 weeks. I've been pretty lucky. I mean, I've been a lucky person all my life, really.
If you sort of rewind right back, why the 100-mile distance? What was the appeal of the 100-miler versus something like sticking to a marathon or like a 50-miler or a 100K? Why the 100-mile distance? What was the appeal, or what sort of resonated with you for that particular distance?
Well, I think the 100-mile distance, it requires a little bit of more strategy involved. You have to kind of sort of like think what you're doing out there. You're not just kind of going out hard and hoping to hang on. I mean, for me, a marathon, I never really had really great speed overall. I mean, my best 5K when I was young, at my highest, fastest time was like 16:20, which really isn't that fast. Looking at some guys at the top of the field now, they've run under 14 minutes, which is crazy. So I never really had that ultimate speed, but I always had a lot of tenacity, a lot of I'm really a thinker, I'm really a strategist. So a lot of the races I've won, they weren't where I went out fast and kind of hung on. I sort of like played my cards right, started out easier, sort of tried to bait other runners to do the wrong thing during the race, tried to play the head games a little bit. And for me, not being as fast as others, especially on smooth terrain, I kind of have to play that strategy to win. So I just kind of enjoy that fact of coming from behind a little bit and being not necessarily being the underdog anymore, but coming from it's fun to come from behind. It's fun to be the hunter, not the hunted. Yeah. And that's just how I race. If I come out on top, then great. If I don't, then it's not going to change my life. I've just learned how to race the 100 in a smart fashion that way to win. And I just like that better. It's more fun. You also don't. I'm not going to say you don't work as hard, but you definitely don't work as hard at the moment, like where your heart rate is higher and you're definitely laboring harder. The 100-mile is kind of like a stay in your comfort zone the whole day and hope to have something left with 30 to go.
Yeah. You mentioned you like to sort of play the strategic game and strategic approach. And when you mentioned you like to bait runners, what do you mean by that? Do you sort of try and go slow or try and push to try and sort of get their heart rate going a bit? What do you mean by sort of trying to lay traps?
You're sort of on the right track with baiting. Like sometimes let's just say, for instance, you're in a 100-mile race. You've got 3 or 4 guys that are maybe not quite at your level, but they're close, and they could definitely beat you if they have a really good day. So say I have that scenario on the start line. I typically will go out normally slow for the first 30 miles, or relatively slow for the first 30 miles. But sometimes when you start out a race and you've got everybody feels good, they're fresh. You can push the pace a little bit the first 5 or 6 miles, which isn't going to matter that much as long as you sort of back off that throttle an hour or two into the race. I've often run races like that where I'll take a few guys with me that are quite a little behind my level and go out hard, and then kind of I'll just slow down and let them pass me. And then what they do is maybe they put their game face on and they start racing me at mile 15 of a 100-miler. Well, racing someone at a 100-miler at mile 15 won't get you anywhere. Yeah. It sort of sets you up for forgetting to eat your food, forgetting to stay hydrated, going out a little too quick for your ability. And then, 40 or 50 comes around, and I may have fallen 10 or 15 minutes behind, but all of a sudden that person that went out too fast and was racing up till mile 50, just, I was like, well, wait a minute here. I'm kind of dehydrated. I need to eat some food. I'm falling apart. And then Karl just kind of chugs along, and finally I'm warmed up, So, I mean, it's just a mental game, really. But that's just what I mean by baiting people, is that, you can't do it to everybody. I mean, not everybody goes for that, and it's kind of, shouldn't be telling my secrets here, but at the same time, it's just a strategic way to race. And you can't really do that in a 50K. You can't bait somebody and then go fast and go slow in a race that's too quick like that. The 100-milers, where it's so intriguing, where you can kind of play head games a little bit. And
so just for listeners, I just want to rattle off some of the achievements that you've done. It's an incredible resume. All-time winner of the Hardrock 100 with 5 wins. All-time winner of the Wasatch 100, 6 wins. You've won more 100-milers than anyone else on earth. The Appalachian Trail record. Ultrarunner of the year in 2006. It just goes on and on. I wanted to ask, let's just say you've chosen a 100-miler that you're going to train for. And let's just say the 100-miler like it's got a lot of elevation, like a really big one, like Hardrock with 8, 9, 10 kilometers of like vertical gain. How do you approach the training for a 100-miler with a lot of gain? Do you what's your approach for training for that?
Well, my approach for training for something that's, extra hard is, I think it's really important for runners to try to train on the terrain that you're going to race on. I mean, I definitely thrive on more technical terrain as opposed to what I call California single track, which has no rocks on it. And Hardrock has always been, Hardrock and Wasatch are both very technical courses. I live right at the base of the Wasatch Mountains, so I live in an area where the trails are steep. There's big elevation gains. I mean, I can get a 4,000-foot climb in out my back door here. So, I'm going to do better on courses that fit my style and what I'm training on. I think that's, generally speaking, that's the, it's not really a secret, but that's how you get better, and that's how you do well on those tough courses. Is you got to train on that kind of terrain. You can't live you might be a special person who lives in Illinois and comes out to run Hardrock. They get in through the lottery and they come out and they might have a good day, but the bottom line is, doesn't matter how many Empire State Buildings you run up on the treadmill or any of that, so how much core work you do. The bottom line is you need to get on terrain that the race is going to be on. I mean, that's just the simplest answer I can give you. If I lived in Indiana or somewhere where it's flat, I would probably do better racing on flat terrain. But I live in Wasatch. I live where there's big mountain relief here, and bigger than Colorado's relief in the mountains. I mean, I'm not quite as high as Colorado, but I'm at a good altitude where I sleep at 5,000 feet, so I'm not extra high, but I'm not necessarily low at sea level. I have great access to where I go, so I run races that are similar to the terrain that I run on.
Yep.
On those tough courses.
Do you ever like specifically train for descending, with like long downhill runs to really try and smash up your quads?
It's a good idea to do that for specific races, I think. I think for a race like Western States, for instance, a lot of us I call it the downhill 100, the track meet. And it's a net downhill, and it is brutal because your climbs are too short where you really don't get enough rest, and then you pound downhill for a while. Typically for me, in my training in the Wasatch, if I'm on my regular summertime, mountain running, I'm running about 70 to 75 miles a week with about 20,000 feet of vertical climb and descent. So the way I look at it, I won't pound downhills real hard. I more or less take the downhills a little bit easier. I have the ability to run hard downhill if I want to, but I really think even running downhill easy, in other words, resisting instead of flowing, you're still getting just as much muscle pounding workout as you have to go down hard without the higher risk of injury. So, I mean, that's just me. That's just how I think. Once in a while I'll pick up the pace and work on my technical skills, but I've always felt that my skills are there if I need to go fast, but running down slow is just as good as going faster, because you get that resistance. It's like resistance training with weights, it's kind of the same thing. But I mean, it really just depends. I mean, I don't do anything really different for Hardrock in terms of like doing longer descents, or I just kind of let my body, I just stay fueled and stay hydrated when I'm in the race and hope that I hang on till the end. Really, it's running these hundreds that take 20 to 30 hours. Sure, you have to be in shape. You got to do a lot of training for it, but the bottom line is you got to eat your food and stay hydrated, and treat your body well while you're also out there, not just beforehand.
Yep. With food, do you have? And I think I asked this before, but it cut out. What's your normal day-to-day diet like? As you're sort of leading up to a particular 100-miler, do you sort of really clean it up, or are you fairly strict in what you eat? Is there
my diet is, I eat a good healthy diet. I mean, but I'm not perfect. Like some people will be vegan, get very strict about how many calories they take, exactly what they take in. For more of the stuff that I've done, especially the AT, it doesn't matter what you just want calories. Yeah. But if I say I was leading into the Hardrock 100, I keep a pretty clean diet, eat a lot of vegetables. I try to stay a lot away from the junk food, but once in a while, I mean, especially after a race, you kind of crave that junk food. And I'm not afraid to throw a cheeseburger and fries down after a race. I don't really feel that there's a specific meal that makes my race that much better the next day. I mean, you go back to the old days. I like to say back in the day, carb load before your marathon. I mean, there's some truth to that for sure, but it only lasts so long. It only lasts a couple hours, which is why people can carb load and then 2.5, 3 hours into the race they blow because they didn't eat anything during them. Is as important as anything else. Which for me is, I mean, I'll eat gel across the board for a 100-miler, and a little bit of soup bouillon, a little bit of Red Bull, a little bit of maybe a banana off the table, some fruit, stuff like that. I eat pretty basic stuff that digests very easily. So for me, that's really the ticket. But I mean, for many people that are going a little slower, your body's able to process food a little bit easier. The less hard you work, the easier it goes in. So, in the basics. And so it just depends who you are. I mean, but when you're running harder and faster, I think gel, whatever form of gel you use, I use First Endurance gel, but I mean, you could use anything really. Yeah. They all kind of work. The AT is different. The AT I ate, my diet was, as much as I hate to say it, it wasn't the greatest diet at all. But at the same time, it was a lot of calories. And for something like that, that's what I needed more than anything was real calories, because I was moving, 3.5 miles an hour on average while moving on the trail. So that's pretty slow for me. So my heart rate was probably about 100, occasionally maybe 120 at the most. So I was really able to process anything. But normal everyday life, the general rule is nothing out of the box, unless it's cereal. Don't go out to dinner, very often. I go out to dinner once a month, which is, even if it's really tasty food, it's probably not all that great for you. And no fast food. We never go out for fast food ever. So I stay away from that kind of stuff. So it's, it's okay. But I'll admit it's not, I'm no perfect vegan with a perfect diet.
Yeah. Do you eat meat?
Yeah, I eat meat. I mean, I think for me that's important. I think honestly, my body always seems like is like a furnace. It's weird. But I think I need the protein to survive. I don't think I could make it without it. So I think, I don't eat a lot of meat. I eat a lot of fish actually. But I eat some meat occasionally. I think it's okay for you.
You mentioned you get through the gels. Do you sort of have like one every half an hour, or do you have like a timer that goes off every X number of minutes that you sort of down a gel?
I think you're on the right track with the gels. I mean, you can say every half hour. That just really depends on how hard you're working, of course. But generally speaking, from a racing perspective, 200 to 300 calories per hour is about what your body can handle. I mean, once you put in more than 350 or so calories, you're probably putting in too much. Then it becomes a problem. So yeah, I mean, and a gel has about 100 calories. So yeah, every 25 minutes probably is about standard. Later in races, when you go just gels, you're kind of going on the edge the whole time. Yeah. So there are moments when you might have one gel and you can always feel its effect. And then, it might be 15 minutes later, like, oh my God, my stomach is empty, and I'll eat another one. But that's just all on feel. And I think eat your food like an IV drip. Yeah. And, it might be a chocolate chip cookie. It's basically sugar. That's all you're really looking at is sugar. I will consume a little bit of protein drink. So a drink called Ultragin, which First Endurance makes. That stuff is gold in a bucket. I mean, if there's any product on earth that I would endorse, which I hate, honestly, something that it really does make a difference. You can really feel it's a recovery drink. So you don't drink it that much when you're racing. But in long hundreds, you might do 2 or 3 servings for the whole 100 just to replace some of your amino acids and your proteins. Generally it's sugar all the way through 100, and then you just eat like crazy for a day and a half afterwards, and everything comes back to normal. Yep.
Do you ever find with the gels, like in terms of the flavors, the ones that you have, are they overly sweet? Do you ever get that, it's really repulsive for me? Like if you're having too many gels, often for me, it's too sweet and I'm sort of craving the salty.
Right. And I think that's very true with a lot of people. It gets after 5, 6, 7 hours. Oh my God, I can't eat another gel. It's just like throwing more sugar in my mouth. And then you crave that salt. Yeah. I think, I'll also take salt caps during the race. I use salt stick ones, but a lot of those work too. But, I think maybe with my balance of sugar and salt stick like that, I don't crave the salty stuff as much, but you still have to ingest both. That's the whole thing. The problem with many people saying, "Well, I can't do gels after 7 hours." Well, it becomes a problem because then you don't start eating and you start messing up with that IV drip I was talking about. Yeah. You have to. Whenever I take a gel in, I'll eat it. I'll put a little water first. I'll eat the gel, and then I'll try to rinse my mouth out as hard as possible with something to get that sugar taste out of my mouth as fast as possible, so I don't get overwhelmed with the sugar. Yeah. I mean, that's just me. I mean, everyone's individual, but I think that's one way for me to sort of stay away from it. And then the second thing, like if I'm 15 hours into 100 and I need food and I've got nothing but 8 gels in my pocket, I just say, Karl, if you don't eat this thing, you're gonna go down, and I just make it happen, Yeah. I mean, you're only out there so long. I mean, even though it's as tough as it is, I mean, it's going to be just blink and it's going to be over quickly anyway. So you might as well just eat the gel and deal with it.
Yeah. With your salt tabs, do you also have like a timer at all to remind you to eat, like or take your salt tabs?
Yeah, I don't use a timer that actually goes beep 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 or something, but I will. I mean, generally speaking, the rule for me is if we'll say that it's 70 to 75 degrees outside Fahrenheit. Obviously Fahrenheit. 1 per hour is pretty standard, and those salt stick caps have 330 milligrams of sodium, so they're pretty high on salt. So that's 1 per hour. It's a colder day, say 50 degrees. I might not take one till like every hour 20 minutes or something like that. So you sort of, instead of taking 2 at a time when you need more, I'll just space it a little bit differently to try to accommodate the temperatures. Yeah. And it's so far so good. It's worked for me really, really well. And I really feel a difference. Like my body almost tells me sometimes when I think I need salt. And all of a sudden I look down at my watch. Whoa, it's been about an hour. Yeah. It's pretty amazing how your body sort of knows these things and can tell me. And I think that just comes with experience. Yeah. The people I coach, I can tell them these general rules, but it's really hard until they've raced a bunch of races and you really learn about how they are to really get the right formula for them.
Have you ever taken I'm thinking for, a massive dose of sodium or salt? Have you ever taken like a small swig of soy sauce?
That would do it. I mean, that's salt too. I think I've never done that, but that would. I don't see why that wouldn't work either. I mean, the funny story. First 100 I ever ran was first ultra I ever ran was the Wasatch 100 here in Salt Lake, and I jumped right into it, and they had salt on the tables. And like just a bowl of salt, which is not so sanitary. But at the same time, I'm like, well, what is that salt for? I had no absolute clue what that was there for, Now, total rookie. So, I mean, just goes to show that. And I didn't take any of that salt the whole day. I finished the race in 28 hours. I mean, I got it done. I suffered, but I got it done. But it just goes to show you that you never really know until you really teach yourself on how to use things. You got to try it by trial and error, I mean, that's for me, my entire life, for everything I've done, has always been trial by error. I can read a book and it just seems to go right in one eye and right out the back of my brain sometimes. Yeah. But I need to learn the hard way. And but now I got to figure it out now.
With 100 milers, in terms of actual food, do you ever mix it up between having sort of solid food or fruit versus like a liquid version, either like something blitzed up in a blender or, you know, like a liquid fuel source? Do you ever mix it up like that, or?
Well, I think what I actually do is gel. I mean, like I said, gel is mostly what I'll take across. Gel and some fruit is what I'll take across the board. Yeah. But in my water bottles, I carry bottles, not a bladder. So in my bottles, I always have just plain water. Okay. And I do that because I think it's very easy for me to regulate what's really going into me instead of, drinking, EFS drink from First Endurance or just Gatorade or whatever. When there's water, you've got 0 calories. So you can easily do the calorie count with what's in the gel packet and you go, boom, you instantly get that 100. And you know what it is, instead of like drinking, say, half your bottle of Gatorade or whatever. And not that Gatorade's good for it, but I'm just using an example, but you use half that bottle and you don't really know exactly how many calories you really took in. When you go just plain water and then just plain gel, it's a very simple formula that's easy to calculate. Yeah.
No, I didn't really consider that. Like often or pretty much most of the time when I run, it'll be with some sort of electrolyte drink mixed in with the water, and I'm sort of consuming gels and food on top of that. And yeah, if you just went the approach of just plain water, it's easier to monitor your calorie intake. It's a good little tip, that one.
Well, and one thing too is that, and when you are taking in some type of, electrolyte drink that has a fair amount of calories in it, one problem that people have is they sort of overload and take too many calories. Remember, I mentioned 350 in an hour is probably too much. So like when you're taking those calories in with your drink, you're eating a couple of cookies, you got a couple gels, and all of a sudden you took in 400 or 500 calories an hour. Well, think of your belly being a funnel. So when you put all this stuff in the funnel, it doesn't all go down the tube. You start to get backed up, and then your nausea starts to kick in. And you say, oh, well, I'm dehydrated, I'm nauseous. Then you start drinking water, which backs it up even more. So that's why I always use that IV drip analogy, because if you take too much at once, then all of a sudden you're just like, you can't process it. You have to slow down, open up that funnel, and everything goes in there and it kind of smooths out and you keep going again. But yeah, plain water has really been working for me really well. And I mean, I'm never going to change that. I mean, when I'm on the AT, when I stop at an aid stop, I will definitely, and this is again kind of different because you're moving slower, but I was drinking Red Bull, I was drinking Gatorade, I was drinking Ultra Gym, which is the recovery drink, which is a lot of calories, all at once. But that was, I'm not moving as fast so I can process it. When you're in a race, you sort of have to keep it. It's so much better to keep it more simple than putting down a food plan for a 100-miler. Whenever I see someone put a food plan for a 100-miler, I kind of laugh at that. I'm like, well, how do you know you're going to want a chocolate chip cookie at mile 80? Okay, well, no, I don't want that. I want the fruit on the table or whatever. Yeah. I mean, that plan is really, really hard to go by. It's good to have a few options and keep it simple, and and then try to refine it as your career gets longer.
Do you have any tips for? I remember a few times I've go out for a really long run, a training run, for example, and you might be a few hours into it and you've got like 3 hours to go, for example. And I remember one particular time for hours, my mind was just clinging to the thought of an ice cold Coca-Cola, and just running. And it was that hot. I was just thinking of that. And my mind was just fixed on an ice cold Coke, and there was no way I was going to have that immediately. The run would have been going for another sort of 3 or 4 hours. But do you have any particular tips to help you not cling to those sort of things?
Well, in different flavors, I just crave that, and I'm not afraid to suck them down. Yeah. I think soda of any flavor, is something that you see a lot of people. I don't drink soda at home at all. I never do. I drink a little Red Bull, which is soda, but it's not very often. But what's funny is during a race, I'll crave I'll drink soda at every aid station. I've occasionally thrown it in bottles, and I think it's just, and that's like late in the race, not early, but it's whatever you crave is really your body's sort of telling you what you want. Like you mentioned earlier, how sometimes I crave salty, potato chips or whatever. Your body probably needs salt. If you're craving salt, you probably need salt. If you're craving that chocolate chip cookie, you probably need sugar. Same with the soda. So there's nothing wrong with trying to jump right on that if you can. I mean, it's good to mix it up a little bit, but as long as what you're craving is working for you, then there's no need to change things. I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's usually my basic motto as well.
Yeah. With caffeine, do you, like obviously with Red Bull, there's caffeine in that. Do you take much caffeine during a 100 miler? And if so, when do you start taking the caffeine? Do you sort of wait X number of hours before you start doing it? Or what's your sort of take on taking caffeine? G'day guys, Matt here. This podcast is a labour of love and all episodes are researched, scheduled, edited, created and promoted in my spare time. Typically, after an episode has been recorded, it can take another 3 hours of post-production activities to get the final cut. If I'm providing you with value and you wish to support my vision of sharing these inspirational stories to the world, you can do so at borntokickarse.com and click on the Patreon banner. Your support will help to maintain the monthly podcast running costs and enable me to outsource repetitive tasks so I can bring you even more kick-ass episodes. Once again, if you want to support me in producing this podcast, head over to borntokickarse.com and click on the Patreon banner. You can't miss it. And now back to the rest of the show. With caffeine, do you, like obviously with Red Bull, there's caffeine in that. Do you take much caffeine during a 100 miler? And if so, when do you start taking the caffeine? Do you sort of wait X number of hours before you start doing it? Or what's your sort of take on taking caffeine?
Yeah, I won't take a caffeine pill. So if I did caffeine at all, it'll be through a cola or through a Red Bull or a gel. I like if I were to spread out, say 50 gels for a race, which is common, I would put a third of those gels I would have caffeine in them. So I mean, I kind of just spread it out throughout the whole day. I don't wait till a certain time. I don't really rely on caffeine to be, the edge breaker where all of a sudden I wake up and I'm wired and I run all night long. I really don't think caffeine has quite that strong of an effect, depending on how your body's doing. But no, I mean, I really don't focus around it that hard, but I do spread it out. I do consume some and spread it out throughout the whole run, not just the second half or going into evening. Yeah. I think it's good to have a little bit in you for a little stimulation, but I suppose it's illegal to have too much, but I'm never reaching those levels. I mean, it's good to have a little. And for some people who never ever, say someone doesn't drink coffee at all. I mean, I drink coffee every morning. I like coffee, It's some people won't drink coffee at all, and they'll consume some sort of caffeine during the race late, and they believe that helps them. Then great, then it helps them. Sometimes it just helps in your head more than anything else.
Now you've got a coffee brand, is that right?
Yeah, Speedgoat Karl's 100 Mile Blend. It's brewed by Jameson Coffee in Indiana. Those guys do it for me. It's more of a kind of a medium to strong blend. It's not super strong. It's medium.
Yeah, cool.
Still there?
Yeah, it sort of dropped out a bit. But do you ever try, or have you ever had bulletproof coffee?
I've never had bulletproof coffee.
Or you can sort of make it yourself with like a shot of coffee, unsalted grass-fed butter, and MCT oil. Blitz.
Interesting. Never heard that.
Yeah, it's actually quite good. I've had it a few times. Obviously, if you buy the actual bulletproof one, it's way more expensive, but you can do it yourself. But often I'll have like a double shot with a nice thick slice of butter, like a centimetre thick, with like a shot of MCT oil, and then blitz it up in a blender, and then have that, and it's quite good.
Nice. That's something. You should send me that recipe one time. Just so I'll give the.
Just with the training, do you do any other cross training at all that to supplement your running, like swimming or cycling or gym work, anything like that?
Well, I hate the gym, so you won't see me going to the gym. That's just my theory. I think my gym is the outdoors, so I'll kind of use that. But no, I mean, as far as cross training, I've done some kind of strange things, like where I won't have a specific routine, but I'll pick up rocks when I go run that actually have some weight to them, about the size of a little bigger than a softball maybe.
Yeah.
And I'll carry those things with me for a little while, and that alone that'll work your arms and things like that. But I really don't. I kind of run harder when I feel good. So when my body's responding well, I kind of make it work a little bit harder. And my body's not responding, I sort of do the opposite. So I sort of often feel that I'm getting the most out of my body that it's giving me that day. I mean, it's a simple way to kind of train, but I mean, I ride my bike. I do have a nice road bike. I ride my road bike more for a recovery tool as opposed to training. I mean, that's fantastic after hundreds. If you go ride for, just an hour every day, just kind of spin your legs, that really works out the lactic acid. I think that's great. If I would try to swim, I'll sink right to the bottom and I'll drown and my career will be over.
Yeah.
Terrible swimmer.
What about any specific training for areas like your glutes, your hips, your core, or your abs? Do you do anything specific for those, or is it just sort of running?
Well, I think I don't do anything specific, but I really think that, I mean, again, if I go back to Indiana and I run around the track every day, that would be a good idea for training for mountains. But for me now, because I run on technical terrain all the time, I mean, even winter right now, the trails we have here, they're snow covered, they're slippery, you're kind of moving and bouncing around all the time. And I really think the variability of trails like that it takes care of itself, That's just, again, my thinking, but it just depends where you live. If you live on that kind of terrain, that variable terrain, you're getting a pretty good workout on all of your body. And, one other thing too is people ask, like, what do I do to become a better trail runner? And my sarcastic answer is like, well, you got to run on a trail. I mean, you got to learn how to. It's not just how strong your core is, you handle the ruggedness, but it's how well you work on your foot-eye coordination, right? Yeah. I mean, I come from a skiing background, so I learned how to ski when I was 3 years old. So when you ski, it's like driving. When you're driving a car, you're not looking at the hood ornament on the front of your hood. You're kind of looking ahead to see what's kind of going on, right? At least in theory. Yeah. So when you're running down a trail or when you're skiing, what you're actually skiing on, and you're feeling the ground as you're skiing. When running on a trail, in theory, you're looking 2 or 3 steps ahead of where you're going to step. So it's really your eye-foot coordination that makes you a great trail runner. It makes you good at technical terrain. It's not how strong your core can be so strong, you can pick up a Mack truck, but if you can't see where you're going, then and feel where you're going, then you'll never be a great, good technical runner. And I focus on being that good technical runner, and I think a lot of it just comes back from, again, that skiing background where I learned how to look ahead when I was really young. So I'm constantly looking ahead now too with everything that I do, even when I'm driving. I mean, I haven't been in a car accident yet, knock on wood. So, I'm doing pretty well on that end of things too, because I really do pay attention to my surroundings.
Do you ever do specific training at night? Like, if you're training for a big 100-miler coming up, and will you ever forego the day session and just focus on, going for a night run, like a long night run?
Yeah, I go out on night runs once in a while. We usually tend to do those on full moons just because it's a little more entertaining. But I mean, it's good to go practice that once in a while. I think it's important to know how to be most efficient in the evening. I mean, you're always going to be a little bit slower because no matter how big your light is, you're still not going to see it as well. But one of the keys that I've always told my runners too is that, when you're racing, it's important to have 2 lights on you at once. One, if you have a light on your head, the brightest one, I mean, that's great and everything, but again, the light's coming right from your forehead, so you're not really seeing the shadows that it produces. So what you need to do, what I tell others to do is I like to strap a light on my hand, so it's sitting on the top of my hand and not where I'm holding it. Like it's kind of there. It's attached to me. Yep. And that way, if I need it, I can hold it low or cast the shadows on the rocks or the trail, and I can see it really well. And that way you can almost go just as fast in the dark as you can in the light. But yeah, I definitely go out at nighttime once in a while, and I enjoy that a lot. It's a different feel. It's maybe even a little quieter. It seems like it's beautiful at nighttime to run, and it's important for people to do that and practice with the gear that you always race in too. Buy a new pack and go run in it. Well, never bring something new in an ultra. Never have a brand new pair of shoes that you've never tried out in an ultra. That's always one of the basic rules, but it's so true. When someone's got their new pack or their new light or something like that, and something goes wrong, and it's like, well, you should have practiced with that thing first. Practice makes perfect. That's the bottom line.
Do you prefer to train for distance or time? Like, I'm going to go out for a 30-mile run, or I'm going to go out for a 4 or 5 hour training run. Do you sort of have more of a preference when you're training for a 100-miler?
I think I more or less train for distance. But again, the train that I run on, I sort of know every single route now, everywhere I'm going, how far it is. And if I were to put it in my logbook, I definitely log distance. But I have so many runs around my area here where I'll go on a 12-mile run. It's got 3,000 feet of climb or more, or something like that. And I can look back at my logs and say, well, this time I did it in 2 hours and 10 minutes. This time I did it in 2 hours and 25 minutes. Why was that? How did I feel? It's important to look at patterns in training like that. And those are sort of based on time, but it really is. I mean, log wise, it's distance, but nothing wrong with training on time. I think ultimately it is time, that really matters. But for my own purposes, it's a distance thing.
With another question on training, trekking poles or the hiking poles, do you use them at all?
I have used trekking poles in the past, and do I like them? No, I don't. The first time I really used them in a race was at Hardrock when I ran my fastest time, 24:38. I had a great race. I was in great shape to begin with, and I sort of felt like the poles were cheating. Now, they're not cheating if they're allowed, so I'm not saying that, but as my career has, gone on, what's funny is that when most U.S. runners went over to Europe, especially to UTMB, everybody in Europe has poles, like 90% of the runners probably seemed like. And so all of us American runners went over there and it's like, wow, everybody's got poles. I need to get poles. And we sort of followed suit. I didn't do that when I went to UTMB. I just ran without my poles, but a lot of other runners got poles. And I said, well, why do you guys have poles? It's like, well, these guys do. But the bottom line is, and I used them and then stepping forward a little bit, in 2014, I used poles on the AT, believing that, well, I'm taking a little bit less shock off my legs, which is probably true. So in theory, you're thinking, well, my body will last a little longer. I'm taking a little shock off my legs and that kind of thing. But 2016, I didn't use poles because for me anyway, they sort of got in my way. I mean, if I wanted to eat something and reach into my little pouch to grab some food, I had to put the pole in my other hand or move it over here or break them down and put them in my pack or whatever. We're not going uphill, but I think they're beneficial if you have a long, steep, sustained climb where terrain is sort of, I'm not going to say slippery, but sort of if you're on like a, all rock kind of trail where the rocks move and you keep your balance a little better. Yeah. So if you have a long climb where you need a little extra balance, something like that, I think they're probably beneficial. But they're worth it. Yeah. If you go in a trail where there's long grass on the side, they're just getting in the way. Downhill, I think they actually slow you down. They might give you a little more balance, and especially late in the racers on people. I think that's a great idea for some. But for me personally, racing, I think because if I were to use them going downhill, I actually slow myself down because I plant that pole and sort of take a little leverage off of it, So I'm sort of actually slowing myself down instead of running for hill faster. So I don't know. I really don't like to use poles. But, to each his own. That's one of those things that if you like it, hey, go ahead and use it. If you feel it helps you, go for it. It's just something that gets in my way personally.
What's the favorite course you've ever run? Or is there one in particular that really pops out in your mind in terms of the scenery and, the climbing and just the whole sort of course? Is there one that really sticks out for you in terms of your favorite?
Well, I mean, it's hard. The Hardrock 100 is spectacular. I mean, what's so cool about that race is that you really do get in the backcountry where you feel like, man, I'm out here, like you're really not that far from civilization. I mean, within 10 miles, you've got civilization, right? But the bottom line is you really feel out there at night, especially at nighttime. You're like, wow, I mean, if, something really goes wrong out here, I actually could die, like if a storm comes in, gets really nasty, that kind of thing. I think from pure beauty, yes, Hardrock is spectacular, but for pure beauty, I mean, it's pretty hard to beat UTMB and Chamonix with Mont Blanc as your backdrop. I mean, again, the course isn't as hard as Hardrock. But it's absolutely spectacular. And I mean, having been over to the Alps a couple of times, I mean, I've been through all the mountains out west, and everything's pretty big out here and all that stuff. But honestly, the Alps are a whole nother level of huge. I mean, they're the same elevation as, say, Central Colorado, but the valleys are deeper. So you have basically bigger mountains. And I mean, the Alps. Yeah, I don't even need a course on the Alps, man. The Alps are just they blow my mind, and I really love that area of the world to run in. And I've only explored a tiny little fraction of it. Yeah. I mean, I would love to go over there for one summer and just hang out and run through the huts and do whatever I want to do. That could be on the radar one of these years, but
so you've done UTMB?
Yeah, I've done it twice.
Yeah. Yeah, like I've seen the footage and watched sort of documentaries and stuff online, but to me that looks just the crowds and all the little villages, sort of dotted around the whole course. I reckon that'd be incredible.
Yeah, the UTMB is the Tour de France of ultra running. Yeah. I mean, it's the ultimate thing where what's so cool is that in the U.S. we have Western states where there's there's a couple hundred people hanging around. And that's great, and it feels like a big, huge thing. But then you go over to UTMB, and there's thousands of people hanging around in every town, and it does feel like you've got 1,000 people yelling at you, "Allez, allez, allez," and you're 10 miles into a race, and you're like, "Well, I don't need to pick up the pace yet," But that's what's so cool about it is the town and the people. I think all of Europe in general, and from the running scene, is that, and in other sports in Europe as well, is that Europeans seem to focus more on individual sports, or they embrace the individual sport more than they do the team sport. And I know there's team sports too, and soccer especially. But in the U.S., it seems to be like, well, the U.S. we're a little more. I don't mean this in a bad way, but we're a little more couch potatoes. They watch the football game, the baseball, the hockey, basketball. We sit down and we watch the sports more, as in the Europeans seem to participate in the sports a little more, even if they're just spectators watching the runners go by. They're still participating in a different fashion. And I think that's like the coolest thing ever. I mean, UTMB it's just spectacular because you have these towns that are just like, they're partying down and they're going off because these 2,000 knuckleheads are running by them, running pretty slow. I think it's exciting to run that race. And I mean, I hope to go back in 2018. I have to earn some points, but I think I think I can do that.
Just on the points, would they sort of let you in without you having to accrue the points, like based on your previous regimen?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think so now. I think that's fair. I mean, they have sort of an elite field, right? So but the thing is, if you're in the elite field, which I think I could qualify as applying that way. But I still have to earn my points. I still have to say, I can't come back in 5 years and say, hey, I've got the AT record. I want 3,800s, but I haven't run a race in 5 years. I want to run UTMB. I think that's kind of unfair to those people that have done all the hard work and earned their points. So I think I might go back this year if I had points, but the Appalachian Trail, you don't earn any points, So I sort of have to play that game, and I think that's okay. And I'm a race director too, and I do let any elite runner in if they want to run. but that's just me. I think they have a fair system, and it's just how it is these days. I mean, ultra running has become a very popular sport. You know, sort of. Let's just say that it's grown a lot over the past 10 years. And, you know, races have lotteries, and to earn your way into that race, you've got to do your homework. And what's amazing is that I think their system is great. I think a lot of races in the U.S., they don't have a point system to get in certain races. And that might be better than the lottery systems that we have here. I mean, Hardrock is a complicated lottery. I'm fortunate to be on, you know, the veterans thing, and that's all great, but it does sort of shut other people out. And then the Western States Lottery, so many people apply, and the more times you apply, the more tickets you get. I think the point system is a great way for people to at least earn to get in that lottery, and that everything should be sort of balanced the same. Yeah. So it's a really hard thing for race directors to have to deal with these things. Nobody wants to turn people away. I mean, but the bottom line is, you know, the government in a way sort of regulates how many people we can have in races. So that changes a lot of things. That makes it tough for race directors.
Yeah. What's it like when you're on the start line? Like, you know, there's a big 100-miler, you know, and the gun hasn't gone off yet, but you're actually at the start line. You're right at the very front, and you're looking around and you see all these other legends of the sport, Killian and all these other big names. And what's that like? Like, you know, when you're looking at them and looking around, you see all these other legends that either have previously won that particular race or have a very good chance of winning it. What's that atmosphere like when you're right at the very front and just taking it all in?
Well, it's exciting to be on a start line like that with world-class runners all around you, and I guess you being as one of them, right? I mean, I think we all embrace that moment. That moment is special because, you know, so right now we're talking about, say I'm running Hardrock in, I don't know, 7 months from now or whatever it is. It's not here yet, so I'm not as excited. But when the time gets closer, you get more and more excited. And to stand on that line is a special moment. Knowing what's going to happen over the next, you know, 24 to 48 hours is like, that's toss-up. And that's what's so good about it is that, you know, what's so cool about it is that you really don't know that. You know your abilities, you know what you hope to happen, you know what hope works, but, you know, then you're all of a sudden you're running and you're kind of chatting as if, you know, everyone's really friends. I mean, the one thing about ultramarathoning is that we all kind of help each other. I mean, to a point. I mean, a race is a race. I mean, I'm not going to pick up the other guy's water bottle if he drops it. But, you know, but the bottom line is, at the end of the day, we're all really friends out there, and we're all out there for the experience, not just always the competition. And it's, I mean, again, it's a race, but we do it because we love it, you know, and being on that line is special. I mean, so many times I've stood on a line like that, and you sort of take it for granted after a while, but I'm sure I'll look back 10 years from now when I'm not able to really be that guy in the front, or less than 10 years now at this point, but I'm not really that guy in the front to beat, you know. When you're that guy with the bullseye on his back, there's really nothing better than that feeling when you're an athlete like that, because everyone's kind of watching you, you know. What's he going to do? I mean, everyone's really, when Killian Jornet steps on the start line, everybody's watching Killian Jornet, you know. I mean, they should be. He's an amazing, absolute, incredible runner, and he's always the man to beat. So, I mean, that feeling is priceless. I guess is what all of us elite athletes try to do, is we want to be that guy every once in a while, and it just makes you feel super high and super cool. And, you know, then you get to go run all day, and I just tell myself I get to run all day supported. Yeah. Just do your thing and see where it pans out, you know?
Do you sort of recall any particular races where you've had like a bit of a back and forth, or a bit of like a dogfight for many, many hours with one or more people? Like, you know, you'd take the lead for a bit, you know, for a few hours, and then, you know, you'd come into a checkpoint, and then the guy behind you would overtake you for a bit, and then you'd overtake, and back and forth. Is there any sort of memories like that you've got, you know, like a real sort of back and forth struggle and dogfight?
Yeah, I think my best dogfight race was, this is kind of an easy answer actually, 2006, the year that I won Runner of the Year. I won 600s that year. I was second at a race called Massanutten 100, and I was 7th or 8th at Leadville. The race that I was in second place, that I ended up second place, I raced with a guy named Simyai Duck, I think. He was from Korea. And of course, I didn't know who he was. I was sort of the man to beat. And there was another guy in the race named Matt Estes, who was also a very fast, incredibly great technical runner. And Massanutten 100 is a very technical race. So we start out the race, and I'm kind of in first and second. Matt and I were close running together. And then there was this Korean guy, Sim Yiduk. Well, who's this guy? Don't worry about him. He'll blow or something like that. So we're about 25, 30 miles into the race, and we're running along a flat dirt road along a river for just a couple miles. And Sim Yiduk comes running by, and he zips on by me. Matt was a couple minutes behind me, but he went by me really fast. And I'm like, who's this guy? And, then I never really knew who he was, but I chased that dude all day long. And I was a couple minutes behind him. I finally caught him at about mile 53, 20 more miles to gain a few minutes. I caught back up to him. I went by him. There was a little out and back. I saw him again. And we dogfighted back and forth all the way through probably about mile 70, where he got ahead of me just by a couple minutes. And I ran as hard as I could to catch him, but I never did catch him. He won the race and still has that record. But that was one of those races that I was basically on the edge of running as hard as I could all the way to the end, and I came in second. I won 600s that year, and the race that I came in second was probably my best race. It was an incredible fight. I mean, I ran against Nate McDowell and Hal Kerner at Hardrock one year. We went back and forth for the whole freaking day. I ended up being the guy that ended up first, but we went back and forth the whole time, and I passed Hal Kerner up in a area called Mendota Basin, and it was just by him. But then he kind of fell apart. Then Nate was ahead, came up and caught up. And there are a lot of races out there where we dogfighted it till the end. But generally speaking, most hundreds, whether I won them or we came in second, third, or fourth, or whatever, you're spread out so much. You become 20 minutes, 30 minutes behind or ahead of someone. It becomes a fight at the very end. But man, that race at Massanutten was that was quite a race, and that was one of my best races I've ever run, and I didn't win. Yeah.
While I was doing some research for this interview, I was looking for stuff online and photos and stuff, and there was a good photo of there was Anton Krupicka, Hal Corner, you, and Scott Jurek. 4 legends of the sport. Do you ever learn from other runners or other legends? Obviously you've got a lot to teach other people, but do you ever learn and pick up little tips and strategies and subtle mindset, approaches to mindset and stuff like that? Do you ever learn stuff from other guys and girls?
Oh, I mean, I think we're learning in ultra running all the time. I mean, even now I'm learning something from somebody at random times, but I think one of the biggest thing I learned recently was, so Scott Jurek had the AT record in 2015. He showed up. He had never run on the AT before, just 30 miles, so basically nothing. He showed up and said, I'm going to do the AT, and he starts out. He gets hurt after a week, kind of a classic scenario. A lot of times we would get hurt the first week because the mileages are so big. He gets hurt, but he keeps going, and I end up hooking up with him and crewing him for a couple weeks because he's a good buddy of mine. I just wanted to help him. And then I had to leave to come back and run Hardrock, and Scott kept going. And Scott was on the edge of basically record pace on the AT in 2015. So when he entered Vermont, maybe 600 miles from the finish. And having done the AT a few times, I knew it very well in Maine and New Hampshire and things. And I knew what Scott was headed into going northbound. And after seeing him break the record, what he was going through, how he did not, the guy didn't sleep like the last week. For me, that was one of the most inspirational performances I've ever seen or watched or heard of. Or, I was talking to his wife, Jenny, just about every day when he was up there and getting more info and stuff. And he inspired me. I learned a lot from him. What I really learned is that, I knew this all along, but, you got to suck it up. The only way you're going to survive and be successful, especially on something that long, is that you have to suck it up and deal with it. And I've never seen anybody suffer so hard as Scott did that last week, because I knew what he was going, where the train he was going through, what he was dealing with. I learned. So when I went up the AT in 2016, unless I got hurt where I couldn't walk, there was no stopping me. I mean, I had days in Pennsylvania where I had really low days and I wasn't looking so good to the public, you know, but I kept thinking back to Scott and I'm just like, you know, he sucked it up too. You know, why can't I? And that taught me a lot. I mean, what I learned from Anton Krupicka is that I probably shouldn't run 180 miles a week. I'm just joking around. Anton's a good friend too. He's great. I love Anton. But one thing, Anton, sometimes he pushes himself too hard and he falls backwards. But he's still an amazing athlete. I mean, he's also, what I've learned from Anton, I think, is that, you know, he gave this impression of minimalism. You know, I mean, he had nothing to do with, you know, 5-finger shoes or minimalism really, but he would go out and run for 25 miles and stuff 8 ounces of water in his shorts and go run, you know. I mean, I never carried a lot when I ran, but if you look at what he carried, he was able to do what he wanted to do with nothing basically in his pocket. So I kind of refined my strategies a little bit and kept it to nothing. I learned a little bit from him. From Hal, I mean, you know, that picture of us standing around, I think that might have been a picture which is up the road from my house. If we're just standing there in front of a Jeep or a car or something like that, that's it. Yeah. Is that the picture?
It. Yep.
Yeah, that picture is, you know, from a long time ago when the Outdoor Retailer Show was here in Salt Lake. And I took my boys for a run. And, you know, it was Scott and Hal. Ian Torrance was also there, I believe. And a couple others were there. And we went up to this one pass. It was real steep called Twin Lakes Pass. And Anton just kind of ran everything up to the top and bounced up there. And he was like, how come you're walking? I'm like, what? Because it's steep. But anyway, but yeah, I mean, those guys, we all learn from each other. I think we all kind of like refined our strategies a little bit, just by watching what others do. Yeah. Hal is very minimal on what he does. Anton's very minimal. Scott carries a little more, but his toughness and grit is really, incredibly impressive. And all his runs, you know, his wins at Western States, his tenacity to Hardrock. When Scott and I raced at Hardrock, you know, a lot of people maybe not know this, but the Monday before the race, so 4 days before the race, he was playing soccer in Silverton, just kicking the ball around, nothing crazy, but they were just kicking the ball around. Scott rolled his ankle and like totally tweaked his ankle where he couldn't walk for 2 days. And, you know, I was there. It was basically Karl against Scott in the field, and Scott came back from that too, and he beat me, you know. And I beat him by a couple hours. So, again, the tenacity, the grit that he has is pretty over the top. And, you know, and now he's just kind of like, you know, he may not race as much anymore, but he made it in the world of ultrarunning, just like I think I've made it pretty well too. And I learned a lot from those guys. I mean, even the new guys from Jim Walmsley to Alex Nichols to, you know, all those guys that are running fast. It's great to have friends like that you can learn from all the time.
Now, with the Appalachian Trail, do you think is that like your crowning achievement?
Yeah, I think it's funny. The Appalachian Trail is definitely, you know, when I finally talked to Red Bull and we finally, you know, worked together to make this happen, I've always said that it's a stamp on my career. I mean, what else can I do, right? I mean, it's not really like, what else can I do? A lot of people ask me like, well, what's next? I'm like, well, God, I don't know. I have to rest a little bit. But that was, for me, that was something that, you know, I made a few tries at it and I failed at breaking the record. I mean, I got to run on the AT a ton before I set this record. But it was one of those things that had I not gone back again in 2016, you know, 49 right now. So it's like, how many years do I have left to really chase a record like that? Not many, you know. It was definitely a crowning achievement. I don't know if it'll be recognized as much as maybe as the hundreds. I don't know. It doesn't really matter to me how much it's recognized. It's for me deep inside, knowing that I succeeded after making a few runs at it, that makes me feel good. You know, I mean, it's definitely a stamp on my career to say, wow, this guy's won all these hundreds, but man, he also did this 2,200 mile brutal trail. You know, I've also done the Pony Express Trail. And I mean, another thing that no one would ever think of doing, but those achievements are pretty something cool to look back on. I mean, the AT, we had a film crew there. They made a movie on it, and it's coming on May 7th. Yep. And I've seen it, and it's pretty entertaining, you know. I mean, there's some real moments in that thing. I look back and say, wow, you know, like, you know, I remember every moment, of course. And it was really cool to watch that. So I know when I get older, I'll be able to look back and say, well, we even have this one on film instead of, you know, people ask me for photos of of my career, and I have like the smallest photo album of anyone. I don't take many photos, and I certainly don't take them when I run, you know. So I'm not going to be able to really look back on my career, and I mean, I'll remember it, but I can't really go through a photo album that's 1,000 pages thick and say, look at this, look at that. Yep. But the AT, I'll be able to do that, and I think that's special, you know, to be able to have that film too. I'm pretty psyched about it.
Yep. So that you did that in 45 days, 22 hours, and a little some change, just beating the record, Scott's record. I listened to another interview of yours, and you sort of mentioned that, you know, you could probably argue the case for there being two records. You know, you did yours from north to south, and then Scott did his from south to north. What's your sort of view on that? Do you think there should be like two records or one record, similar to like with Hardrock? You know how there's the clockwise and anti-clockwise.
Well, I think there's a northbound and southbound record. I said that. I mean, it's funny. You mentioned that when I got wind that Scott was doing it, 4 days before he started. I didn't even know he was doing it. 4 days before he started, I got wind of it from a friend of mine. And so, you know, so he started, he got going, and I contacted him to help. And you know, moving forward, after a week, he gets injured, and he had to really slow down his pace. So he basically fell. He lost a lot of miles because of that injury. He probably lost like a day's worth probably of miles. And I said to Jenny, his wife, I said, well, I can always go for the northbound record because the record was set southbound. And she kind of laughed. She's like, wow, what are you talking about? The record's a record. And Jenny was just kind of joking around. And I know Jenny, so it was just kind of a funny conversation. But yeah, he goes north, but he does get the whole regular, you know, the either way record. So boom, that's the record. And then Jenny would later kid with me because they helped with me, you know, at the end. Karl, you can break the southbound record if you take an 8-hour nap tonight. I'm like, well, I'm not taking a nap on the last night. I think it's different in both directions. Where Scott ended in New Hampshire and Maine. So New Hampshire and Maine are ridiculously hard. It's about 400, maybe 300, and let me think about this, about 380 miles of brutality that is just so much different than the rest of the AT. It's so much more technical. It's slippery. There's much bigger elevation gains. There's water crossings. There's weather issues that can happen that can make it a lot worse. So when you finish on that last, say, 10 days, it's a much harder finish than going southbound in the mountains down there. I mean, you go over the Smokies, but the Smokies really aren't that hard. The Southern Virginia mountains are hilly, but it's not as technical. So I had an easier finish. Like, had I been feeling worse, you know, feeling really bad, it would have been easier to me to finish and actually get the record. Scott was in such a pain cave going through those mountains in Maine that I kind of think it's harder going northbound. And I've always said that I think Scott's run was more impressive than mine, even though I was 9.5 hours faster, just because the way he suffered at the end, you know. He fell behind record pace really early, so he had to catch up, which I helped him do. I mean, he was about 40 miles behind. I took over logistics, and I helped him not think about how much he had to catch up, but just think about day to day. And then by the time I left for Hardrock, he caught up. For me, I was looking at Jen Farr's itinerary, so I was looking at exactly where she was every night, and I knew where I could gain ground on her early. And I'm not the kind of guy that banks miles early. It's really not my style, but she also suffered about 10 miles into it and had about 4 or 5 or 6 even days of lower mileage. So I was able to put time on her where I was a full day ahead of where she was. So I never really fell behind the record. Scott did and had to catch up. I know I got ahead, got injured, and gave time back, but I never really fell far behind. So mentally I had a little bit better outlook going into it later in the run instead of like I'm not suffering as much. I'm still on pace. All I really had to do was bang out that last 85 on the last day. And that's where a lot of my hours came from. I mean, and then I beat her time by 13 hours. Yeah. So that was a huge last 4 days. You know, if you look at it that way, Scott didn't have that opportunity. He had to scrape his way to the top of Katahdin and barely make it, you know? So like I said, Scott's run was really more impressive. I really think so.
What is it about pain and suffering that has taught you about yourself, you know, through running? or you've suffered so much, like you've won more than anyone else, 100-milers. You've done all these incredible races and you've run countless hours and countless miles. But all of that, peppered through all of that, there's a theme of suffering, physical and mental suffering. What has that really taught you about yourself?
Well, I think anytime someone suffers through anything, even if it's, I mean, I wouldn't know this, but even if it's a life-threatening disease, and then you come out of remission, you feel better, everything's fine. I think you learn a lot about yourself that, I've got to use David Horton's quote again. It doesn't always get worse, And so I can constantly tell myself when I'm in those suffering moments that it doesn't always get worse, Karl. It might feel better tomorrow, So you've got to keep pressing forward. You learn that you can do a lot more than you think. People give up way too easy a lot of times. And, a lot of times people drop out of hundreds and then you'll see them at the finish line having a couple beers, relaxing, walking around perfectly fine, like they didn't even run the first 60 or 70 miles. But then they sort of regret it later because well, why didn't I suck it up and deal with that last part? When you do deal with that last part, even your fastest race might be your best race mentally because, like Leadville, a great example of that would be where you learn something about yourself is Matt Carpenter at Leadville. The first time Matt ran a 100-miler was Leadville 100, and Matt was hands down the best mountain runner maybe in the world at that time. And he went after the record. He blew up about mile 75. His quads were destroyed, and he walked in. And everybody, had Matt Carpenter walked off the course and said, "Oh, I blew up, maybe next year," and that would have been a failure to him. But he walked to the finish line and came in about, 25th place or something like that. But that was a very, very successful run for him because mentally he said, "I can still do this. I can still go to the finish line," That probably taught him a lot mentally that, next time I'll get it right, but I'm going to finish this thing off because that's what I came here to do. And when you do that for yourself in any race, even if it's someone who's trying to finish a 5K, you learn a lot about yourself and how strong you can be and how strong the mind really is. I mean, running 100-mile ultras or 50-mile, 50K, whoever you are, it's very satisfying to finish, It's a little demoralizing when you don't finish, but especially if you're not injured. If you're not injured and you don't finish, then that's kind of, you got to call that failure, That's failure in your head, not in your body, but it's failure in your head because you could have done it. You couldn't mentally talk yourself into it. Those times when you talk yourself into it and finish is pretty darn rewarding. I mean, like I said, I had a Leadville moment like that too, where in 2006, when I came in 8th in my big year, when I won Runner of the Year, but the Leadville wasn't a bad race. And I was in second place. I wasn't going to catch the winner, but I was in second place with like 20 to go. And I got really cold. It kind of blew up. Things didn't turn my way, and I walked it in. But I felt really good for finishing because it meant a lot to me to mentally get through that last crap, and deal with the issues. You get stronger when you go through problems like that. It's just the bottom line.
Where did the name Speedgoat come from?
The name Speedgoat came from one day my buddies and I were driving home from the Pikes Peak Marathon, I think it was 93, and we're driving home just talking, chatting in the car, blah, 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 and kind of like a jackrabbit ran across the road, and I said to buddy, "Hey, it's a Speedgoat." And that name stuck ever since. I don't know how it came out of my mouth, my buddy will claim it, but I'm like, "Hey man, I'm faster than you. I'm the Speedgoat." We kind of argued back and forth for a couple of years of who the Speedgoat really was, but I guess I'm the one that kind of claimed it. But yeah, just to drive home in the car, something ran across the road and we just threw that word out there. Yeah. And it kind of resonated, it was like, man, that's kind of a cool word, it's kind of a cool name for a shoe from Hoka. It's a cool name for a guy's nickname. It's a cool name for a pack. It's just like, hey, I'll try to work on that name a little bit. And I sort of stuck. And then one year I ran the Zane Gray 50, which is a race in Arizona. And I just entered as Karl Meltzer, like normal, but the race director put Speedgoat Meltzer. Right. And yeah, and I didn't know that was coming. I just happened. And I kind of laughed and people sort of caught on to that. And now it's caught on pretty well.
Yeah. Did you have much input into the design of the Hoka One One Speedgoats?
Yeah, I had a fair amount of input to the shoe. I mean, I'm not a shoe designer, so I don't know how to do all the programs to make it. But my main input for the shoe was to make a shoe that, number one, had real traction with a Vibram rubber on the bottom because, in the Wasatch, you kind of need traction. And the key with traction is to have a lug that isn't too big, a lug that isn't too wide. It's pretty important. It seems kind of unimportant, but it's very important to see how wide they are spaced and how deep they are and things like that. My second big piece of input was how much cushion do we really want to have on the shoe? Do we want it to be a max cushion, kind of like the Hoka Mafate, which was, the big boys, or do we want it to be a little bit lower where you feel the trail just a little bit, but you still get max cushion without poking through the sole? So that was one thing that I really pushed for, was just the right amount of density in the sole. So you feel the trail, but you don't feel the rocks, and that's tough. That's a hard one because you go through a couple of different prototypes and everything costs money, and then just having a soft upper, which the Speedgoat 1 doesn't have a real soft upper. Then the Speedgoat 2 is going to be slightly different, and we'll be a little bit softer. So yeah, I mean, you can be a shoe wearer and stuff like that. As a shoe wear tester for any company, you don't really realize it takes a few years to put a shoe together. Yeah. You don't just send it off to wherever they're made, and all of a sudden, a month later you have shoes. It doesn't work that way. It takes a lot of planning, a lot of money, a lot of and I think we got very close on the Speedgoat 1. The Speedgoat version 2s are just, I've run in them, no one else has, but they're off the charts. I mean, I'm pretty excited to see the minor improvements that we made from the last ones, and I'm excited to see how we sell them. I mean, they're a great shoe, and they have real traction. I mean, it's not a road shoe, so don't go plan on running it on the roads. It's a shoe for technical terrain. It's great in the mud. It's great on the snow because of the lugs, and it's just the right. Pretty psyched to be part of it, no doubt about it. To have your own shoe is pretty priceless.
Yeah. Now, you're also a race director.
Yes.
The Speedgoat 50.
Speedgoat 50K.
Yeah. Tell us about that. Where is it and when is it?
So that race, Speedgoat 50K, this year will be on July 28th and 29th. On the 28th, we have a race called the Vertical Mile, which is a unique race, which is unique to just about any race in the world, where you run uphill for 2,400 vertical feet, and then you take a ski lift down, and then you run back to the peak, which is another 2,900 feet. So it's a vertical mile, vertical mile. It's about 6.5 miles of running, but a vertical mile of climbing with a chairlift ride down. And then the Speedgoat 50K, the classic race, is on Saturday morning at 6:30 on July 29th, and that's at Snowbird Ski Resort in Utah. And we get about 300-400 runners every year. There's really no limit, so entries go online February 10th. The race is I make it as hard as possible, so you can expect it to be difficult. It's about 12,000 feet of vertical climb. Some of the bigger climbs come near the end. It's I make it, like I said, I kind of make it kind of demoralizing, where you keeps beating you down mentally, and then finally you get to the finish line. So it's the whole idea is to have a race that entertains everyone. Everyone loves it at the end. Kind of hates it when they're doing it, but loves it at the end. And classic beer and pizza at the finish, which is kind of my style. And we keep it kind of with a low-key feel. It's Hoka One One is the big sponsor behind it. We've had $20,000 prize purse, which is the largest prize purse of any 50K in the country. And thanks Hoka for that. So it's one of those races where a good competitive field, but at the same time, the elite runners all hang out with everyone to the finish line, and it's pretty cool to have a race of your own. At a ski resort that I was a ski bum at once. Yeah. So it's a great relationship I have with Snowbird.
Yep. Now, if you could make a phone call to the 20-year-old Karl Meltzer and give him some advice, what would you tell him?
Patience, my friend. I would just say, hey, Karl, you've done a lot, and there's no need to do anything more, but, keep doing what you're doing and just kind of try to keep inspiring others, because, my world, I'll be honest, I've been asked, like, hey, do you do this to inspire others? And I'll be honest, I don't think I do it to inspire others. I do it to kind of inspire myself. But at the same time, I'm psyched that I inspire others, you know? I mean, I think it's cool that people can look back at me now. I'm 49, so I mean, there's so many young kids out there that are racing. They're so fast, and they're out there in the moment. You know, the guys who win Runner of the Year now, like everybody's sort of watching them, but they can still look back and say, well, Karl was still out there for 20 years, you know? I hope to just keep inspiring people to get out there and just do what they love to do and really enjoy the sport more than, I mean, it's about competition, but hey, Karl, you just keep going doing what you're doing, you know, and don't try to change the world for anyone else. Just do what you like to do, and people will just follow you. You know, that's important to people. For me to have people just to like say, wow, I saw you on, you know, in some movie or something like that. To me, that's like the coolest thing ever, even though I try to keep it real low key and be pretty humble about it.
In terms of who do you think who's the best runner aside from yourself? Or who do you admire the most in terms of running today?
You know, that's a good question. I think I admire, I mean, a lot of people probably say this, but I admire Killian for, even though I had to disqualify him at my race, that's another story, which I feel, you know, kind of stunk to have to do that. But I think Killian's interesting because he's kind of doing what he wants to do. And that's sort of always been my theme. Like, go do what you want to do. Like, he's got ideas of, you know, going up and down Everest, which is way beyond anything I'd even consider. But I like the fact that he doesn't feel strapped to having to race all the time. But it's also inspiring to see guys like, you know, some of the faster, younger guys pushing the bar and pushing the limits of what's really possible. And we're looking at times and records, you know, I've been around for 20 years now, and I'm watching records continually fall. And if you would ask me 20 years ago or 10 years ago, like how low would the Hardrock record be, I'd never say 22 and a half hours, you know, like no freaking way. But people are pushing those limits. And I just like to see guys continually push hard and push the limits, you know? I mean, Jim Walmsley has done some incredible things. We're seeing guys that, you know, he told me his best 5K time is 13:51. Jeez. Yeah. And I'm just like, oh my God, 13:51. I told you mine was like 16:20, right? I mean, come on, you know? Guys like that are coming into the sport and raising the bar. I mean, will they chase the 100-mile distance? You know, as I said before, I don't think so. I think they're going to chase those big wins, but nothing wrong with that. I think it's good. I mean, I think watching the sport evolve and become bigger, but still remain a low key sort of sport where it's competitive at the front, no doubt about it, but it's still a fun thing to go do to run 100-mile because everybody kind of hangs out with everyone else at the end. And I think that's important to keep the racing to a kind of a low-key atmosphere. It's pretty cool. Yeah.
And whereabouts can people find you online and follow, you know, your progress and stuff that you're up to moving forward? Whereabouts can people find you?
Yeah, I do have my own website. It's karlmeltzer.com. I'll be honest, I don't blog on that all that often. I poke around Facebook a lot more because it's just easier. You know, I think the world is sort of becoming that way, but karlmeltzer.com will explain the 50K, kind of what my bio is, what I do, that kind of thing. But I generally, you know, with social media, I bounce around that all the time. If you ever need to message me, that's always an easy place to find me. But yeah, I mean, you know, just Google the name, I guess, to read up on some random entertainment if I have some for you. But it's kind of, like I said, it's kind of cool just to be out there in the world. The internet has done a lot for a lot of people, and it's done a ton for me. Yeah.
Did you say you're actively working towards like another race? Have you got another race sort of in your sights that you're either actively working towards or you're sort of just contemplating doing?
Well, I think you know, I'm registered for the Sonoma 50, which is April 15th. Not 100% sure I'm going to run that. In terms of like actively, I think my second half of the season will be my best. I mean, I'm just kind of returning to normal running now from after the AT. So I'm not in very good shape right now, but that'll come. I think it's really going to come second half of the season. And so my real main focus on a race in the second half of the season is Run Rabbit Run 100 in Steamboat, a race that I've won in the past. And it's got the prize purse is $60,000. So, which is the largest prize purse of any 100. And I kind of helped Fred Abramowitz, the race director, he and I were the first two people that started talking about that race. And then it actually came to happen. And then I won it the first year. So I kind of want to go back to that race and do well and just see what I've got left in my tank. I think I've got plenty left. Maybe not. I don't know. Fred will always count me out of winning the damn thing, but he counted me out the first year too. So I just want to go back there and race well. And my only other goal this year is to try to win another 100-miler, and it doesn't have to be a big one, but it would be the 17th year in a row that I won at least one on a calendar year. And even though that record is sort of it's not really going to fly, it's kind of going to be lost in the shuffle. But to me, again, it's one of those things personally that would be kind of cool to achieve another 100-miler this year, and just keep that record flowing. I mean, bottom line is I want to stay healthy. I don't want to get injured. And I want to just keep my career to keep moving. I mean, Hoka One One was, I'm honored to be part of that team still. I mean, being 49, obviously, I've got to be coming to the end of my career, but I just signed for a couple more years. And so they have a lot of faith in me to continue on and running at a high level. So it's pretty cool to be where I'm at.
Yeah, that's great. Appreciate you coming onto the podcast. And it's been a real honor speaking to the winningest 100-mile runner ever. It's been really good, and I've learnt heaps from you. And good luck with the races coming up, in April, and just moving forward. Good luck with everything.
Yeah, thanks for everything. Hey, stay tuned for the movie. It's called Karl Meltzer Made to Be Broken. It's pretty entertaining. That'll be on Red Bull TV on May 7th is when they're gonna release that. So it's only 40 minutes, so it won't bore you too much. But it'll show you what some real misery is all about. But it's really an honor to be on the Born to Kick Arse. Yeah, It's great to be on. It's really cool to be. It's always an honor to be on a podcast. I've done a lot of them since the AT, and it's definitely one of the best ones. So thanks very much.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, thanks again, and cheers.
Cheers. Have a great day.
You've just been listening to the Born to Kick Arse podcast at borntokickarse.com. If you liked what you heard and want more, please subscribe on iTunes. Give a 5-star rating and a Kick Arse review. This really helps to boost our presence and continues to allow us to introduce you to the most fascinating people on the planet. Welcome aboard, and catch you next time.